I was taking a look at the Weather Channel this morning, and I do have a 80% chance of it raining tonight. And the Weather Channel also is now saying that I got another 80% chance of it raining again tomorrow morning. So I got a chance of it raining at about 2 in the morning, and then I have another chance of it raining again at about 7 or 8 in the morning. And there's some kind of a tropical storm system or something that's coming in to the north. Up in Oklahoma, there's a big old storm system. It's like a cold front that's opening up over the area, and it's bringing in a lot of rain tomorrow and tonight. And so real early tomorrow at about 2 in the morning, I got a chance of it raining, and then I got another chance of it raining now. I got another chance of it raining again later in the morning tomorrow. So I got 2 chances of it raining between tonight and tomorrow morning. So I did go ahead and herbicide the field, and I did go ahead and fertilize the field at the same time too. And so I used 1.5 tons of fertilizer, and I used 2 gallons of Duracor, and I applicated the herbicided fertilizer at 200 pounds per acre. So I used 200 pounds per acre. I used 2 gallons of Duracor and 3,000 pounds of fertilizer. And okay, so yeah, I got that done this morning. And also the calf with the bad leg, he looked like he was doing a little bit better today. I'm not sure what's going on with his leg, but he does look like he's doing a little bit better today. I am keeping a good eye on the calf. If by this time next week he's still limping around, I'll go ahead and I'll catch him and I'll take him to the vet. Okay, so the whole thing about me pulling out money from the business, okay? I'm gonna go into more detail about this today. This is something big that's coming up, and this is something that I'll be doing, and it's gonna be a lot of money, okay? Okay, so the big idea of me pulling money from the business. The business right now, okay, my balance sheet, my assets are effectively growing all the time, all right? My assets are growing in value all the time. My cattle are getting bigger all the time. My whole thing about, the 3 pools of money, the pool number 1 is the money that I put in the deal, okay? Pool number 1 is the money that I put in the deal. Pool number 2 is the unrealized gain of my cattle herd. And pool number 3 is the check that I have in my hand. And so the whole thing about the check that I have in my hand, and when I take that check and I put that money back into pool number 1, granted that the whole thing about that is that when the whole thing about what I call printing my own money. When I sell 5 big cattle, I make enough money to buy 10 small ones, okay? And that's effectively where I make my money. That's where my margin is. And you have to remember, pool number 1 is the amount of money that I put into the business, okay? Pool number 1 is the amount of money that I put into the business. And pool number 3 is the check that I have in my hand. And the check that I have in my hand, there is a profit margin in that check. I sold 5 animals and I made enough money to buy 10. So when I move the money over to pool number 1, I am now moving a dime. So I traded a nickel for a dime, and now I'm putting that dime into pool number 1, right? That's what I'm doing. I made a profit, I realized my profit, and I invested the total sum back into my business. Granted that I do this over the next 3 months, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet will fall to about 30% or less. The amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet will be 30% or less. It might even be, it'll be 30% or less, okay? Something like that. Granted that I just continue to run the business, okay? I make my profit, I reinvest that profit, I invest the total sum. And here's a question. Here's a question to maybe help develop more of an understanding of what's going on in case whatever, right? If I sell 5 animals and I'm 50% leveraged, let's say I'm 50% leveraged, and I sell 5 animals and I make enough money to buy 10, and I go to the bank and I take a loan for 5 more animals. When I invest that sum of money, is the amount of leverage in my balance sheet, in the total amount of my balance sheet, and let's say that 1 month goes by. So it takes me a month to invest it takes me a month to buy the 15 animals, okay? So it took me, let's just say whatever, let's just say a month to make it easy. So it took me a month to buy the 15 animals. Did my equity proportion, did the amount of debt that I have on the entirety of my balance sheet, even though I took a loan for 5 more animals, did the debt ratio of my balance sheet go up or down? It went down, right? Because if 1 month goes by, the rest of my cattle herd will produce me money, and the 15 animals that I bought will have also produced me money. There, I would have to have lost like all 15 animals for me to not have made any money. Okay, if my balance sheet is already 50% leveraged or just 50% leveraged, and I only leverage against my earnings, right? If I sell 5 animals and I make enough money to buy 10, and I take a loan for 5, and my balance sheet is 50% leveraged, even then, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet would go down, right? This is the big problem, right? For me to, because when I leverage against my earnings, right, that, unless I take more leverage than the amount of money that I made, like if I had 10 animals, if I had 5 animals and I sold 10, and the overall leverage on my balance sheet is 50%, and I'm looking to raise the proportion of leverage that I have on my balance sheet, and I sold 5 and I bought 10. For me to increase the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet just by leveraging against the money that I made, I would have to buy like at least 8 animals on debt, right? I would have to buy at least 8 animals on debt, something like that. It'd be like 6, 8, something like that. The 5 animals, even if I take a loan for 5, if I sell 5 and I buy 10, even if I take a loan for 5 more, the proportion of my balance sheet in leverage is still 50%. This does not include the amount of time that it would take for me to invest the money, okay? And when I go full-time self-employed, I may be able to invest money faster, but I will still need a larger preconditioning pen. All right, and here's the thing. And this is also what I mean, okay, and so the amount of leverage that I would have in terms of a proportion of my entire balance sheet would still go downwards, okay? Even if I took a loan for 5 more animals, if I sold 5 and I made enough money to buy 10, even if I managed to do that instantaneously, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet would still go downwards because I added 10 animals, right? I put 10 animals into the first, I added 5, and then I added another 5 from debt, and that wouldn't lower. And granted that if I did that instantaneously, and realistically it would still take me a week or 2. Even if I'm full-time self-employed, it would still take me a week. All right, it might even still take me 2 weeks. All right, and so but just to make things simple, the overall idea is that my leverage would still go downwards, okay? The amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet would still go downwards. And so when I take a look at everything that I have going on, the fundamental idea is that the equity position that I have in terms of a proportion of my balance sheet, the equity position is always going upwards, granted that I am continuing to take care of the cattle. And the cattle are, under 1,000 pounds on the average, right? I mean, if I have great big old 1,400 pound animals and I'm sitting there, I'm not going to be making hardly any money, if any at all. Granted that like the average weight of my animal is like still within a reasonable margin, like 600. The average weight of my animal right now, if I include all of the animals, like the front end, all of the small little diddly doodad calves and the bigger calves, and I consider all of that, effectively the average weight of my herd will always be at about 500, right? The smallest animals that I bring in a bunch of animals at 200 pounds and I sell them at 800. So 500 is the average, right? 200 plus 300 is 500 plus 300 is 800, right? So the average weight of my herd is about 500 animals, or excuse me, about 500 pounds. And so at a 500 pound average weight, I am still profitable, right? And the animals that I am the least profitable on, my biggest animals, they are going to be the ones that I liquidate to produce the pool number 3. And pool number 3 does have a profit margin, right? I do make a profit when I sell my animals. And pool number 1 is the amount of money that I put into the business. And so if I make a profit and I put that money into pool number 1, then I am adding to pool number 1, okay? Because I am taking the profit and I'm reinvesting all of that money back into the business. And so even if I take a loan for 5 animals, if I sell 5 and I buy 10 and I take a loan for 5 more, and I do that over the next 3 months, I will still end up reducing the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet. I will still end up reducing the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet in terms of a total proportion. And it's also important that if I do that over the next 3 months, right, I will have made a return on that capital. I will have unrealized gains on that capital, and that will reduce the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet in terms of a total proportion of my balance sheet. It would reduce the amount of leverage that I have, right? And this is the big problem that I'm at. You know, over the next 3 months, I would reasonably anticipate that my leverage goes under 30%. And what do I evaluate the net positive? You know, let's say that I'm at 30% leverage and I'm looking to go to 80% leverage. And I have, 75 cattle, right? I have, 75, 100 cattle. When I take a look at that, I mean, how much money are we talking? Okay, well, I still make my check on a monthly basis. That check will still be $12,000 or $14,000. And then I look at my unrealized gain and I say, well, I bought 15 animals 3 months ago, and they've probably put on about 6 pennies worth of, 6 pennies, about $7,000 worth of gain. And then I have another set of 15 animals behind that. And those 15 animals, they probably produced me another 3 animals worth of money, and then before that, I have another 15 animals worth of money. And I take a look at that and I say, well, those 15 animals, even right now, I'm still at 30% leverage. And so in all honesty, all 45 of those animals, I would still be willing to leverage. I need to take more leverage. That's the whole thing. I'm not saying I need to take more leverage. I'm just saying I have a lot of positive equity. The positive equity position of my herd is climbing on a daily basis. Right? This is very important to understand. Like, if you do not understand that the average weight of my animal is 500 pounds and the animals are getting bigger on a daily basis, you're a moron. All right? You need to get it together. This is not confusing. This is not difficult to understand. All right? Get your head out of your rear end. All right? This is not confusing. This is not difficult. If you have 80 IQ, you can understand all of this. I have a bunch of cattle on my balance sheet. I've effectively spread them out evenly between 200 and 800 pounds. The average weight of my herd is roughly 500 pounds if I include all of the animals, and the animals are gaining weight on a daily basis. Every single day that goes by, every single moment that goes by, my equity position is increasing in value. The total amount of debt that I have in terms of a proportion of my balance sheet is going lower. And I've already said, when I make money, I am planning to sell 5 animals on a monthly basis. And when I sell the 5 animals, I will be reinvesting all of the profit. There will be a profit margin to be made. All right, I will be able to increase the size of my herd. Though that increase in the size of my herd will even produce me even more money. Right? This is the big conundrum right now. Right? Is the amount of money that I'm making is becoming so large. And here's a way to look at it. Here is what I'm looking at. In 3 months, the 50% net positive equity position, right? My leverage will be about 30%. I'll have about a 50% positive equity position. I will still be making about $15,000, $14,000, $12,000 a month on a monthly basis as a check in my hand. And this is also going to tie into how do I plan on pulling money out of the business. So I will still be making $12,000 or $14,000 money in my hand, right? Every single month I will be making $12,000 or $14,000 a month. But that $12,000 to $14,000 is the tip of the iceberg. Where my money is in the equity of my balance sheet, the equity of my cattle. The equity of my cattle will be in the net positive by hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right, if I have 100 cattle and they're averaging 500 pounds, you know, that alone will be like 200 grand or something, you know, like 200, you know, $200,000. And so, you know, I take a look at it and I say, well, I have this cattle herd worth $200,000, and the cattle herd is still growing. And for me to invest all of this money, you know, I'm at 30% debt. So for me to invest all of this money, I would have to invest, you know, for me to put myself at 80% leverage on 200,000, I would be looking to invest 160. Oh, but I would be, you know, I'm already 30%, so I'm looking to invest 50%. So I'd be looking to invest another $100,000, right? So I have $200,000 worth of cattle. I already have 30% debt on them, but I'm looking to take 50% more debt. So that would be $100,000, right? That would be $100,000. So I would have to invest $100,000 to increase my debt proportion by 50%. But then I take a look at it and I say, oh, well, but I still have this check in my hand. And that check in my hand is for $12,000, $14,000, whatever it may be, 14 grand, okay? So I got a check in my hand for 14 grand. And I take a look at the situation and I say, well, if I put this $14,000 back into my business, that will reduce the amount of debt that I have in terms of a proportion of my balance sheet. That will reduce the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet. So I need to, you know, so instead of putting the money back into my business, I will hold on to the cash. You know, that's effectively what I'm headed for right now, is that, you know, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to, you know, but here's the thing. If I genuinely have an opportunity to grow my business, you know, to legitimately invest $200,000 a month, like if I legitimately have an opportunity to invest $250,000 a month, I will do it. All right, because I can invest but here's the thing. Let's say that I start pulling the money out of my business, right? And I say, well, I can, right now I'm making $15,000 a month, and in 4 months I will start making, the 15 animals will have hit the front, will be on the back end of the herd, and I will be making a $40,000 check in my hand, right? I can start pulling the money off of the business. But if I have a bunch of, but the whole thing is that when I sell my 15 animals, let's say I sell 15 animals and I make not 40, let's say I make enough money to buy 30, right? And I sold 15 and I made enough money to buy 30, right? This would be 7 months down the line of me selling 5 and buying 15. 7 months down the line, the $15,000 check in my hand, the $14,000 check in my hand would now be about 28-30,000, okay? Would be about 30 grand. Wait, if I sold 15 animals, that'd be about 40 grand. All right, that'd be about 40 grand. 15 animals at 800 pounds would be about 40 grand. All right, so I'd be making about $40,000 as a check in my hand. So I'm sitting there, but that's the, and I know that this, I don't want it to be too confusing. But, it's not confusing. That's the thing, is that it's not confusing, and that's why I don't want it to be confusing, because it's not. All right, the big idea of what is going on is that the amount of equity in terms of a proportion of my balance sheet, the amount of equity that I have in terms of a proportion of my balance sheet is constantly moving upwards. As long as I am taking care of the cattle and the average weight of the cattle is somewhat reasonable, like 5, 6, maybe even 700 pounds, they are still gaining. I am still gaining value on my cattle every moment that goes by, granted that I take care of the cattle. The amount of proportion of my equity in terms of my debt, my equity position is always moving upwards, granted that I am doing my part. And the big problem is that within 3 months, right now I make about $35,000 a month. And in 3 months, I will realistically have to probably pull about $140,000. It won't be $100,000. But here's the thing. It will take me time to invest that 140 grand. And so this is only a temporary situation. And I will probably end up just taking the money and buying myself a big old piece of land and just build a house on it. All right. You know, I'm not looking into buying myself a Lamborghini and things like, you know, I've already even talked about all that stuff. You know, the whole thing about a Lamborghini is that, you know, like one of the big benefits of my life that I get the benefit from is that, you know, for me, it's not like an ego thing to make money. All right. I honestly, I don't care. All right. You know, I actually like being able to go out into public and not being swarmed by people. And if I'm driving around in like a Phantom, if I'm driving around in a Bentley or in a Rolls Royce, it's going to be like everywhere that I go, people are going to notice me. And you know, I don't, you know, the thing about, you know, my whole situation is that, you know, for as long as I can, I would like to go unnoticed. You know, I would like to go unnoticed for as long as I can, because I like being able to go to a grocery store and not having to worry about, about anything. I like being able to go into a department store. I like being able to go to a gas station. I like being able to, you know, whatever it is. I like being able to go out and not being concerned about it. I don't want to stick out. All right, that's the thing about my situation, and my whole thing is I'm looking to do that for as long as I can. All right, and you know, I don't want to be in a situation where I can't even go out into public without being swarmed by people. I don't want that to happen. And so, you know, if I'm driving around in a Lamborghini, if I'm, you know, driving around in a Phantom or something, if I'm driving around in a Rolls Royce, people are gonna, everywhere that I go, people are gonna notice. And I don't want to be bothered by that. All right, I don't want to be in a situation where it's like I can't even like go outside, right? Because, you know, whatever, you know, because now I'm being, you know, harassed or whatever. I don't want that to happen. And you know, but that's the whole thing about you know, about the amount of money, how much money am I making, how much money am I pulling out of the business, and you know, and how am I going to do it, and why am I going to do it? Because just over the next 3 months, I will have a net positive equity position of about I would say it's probably going to be about $100,000, about 100,000. You know, my net positive equity, will be like 120 grand. It'll be like 140 grand. And so out of that 140 grand, I will take a loan for 100, leave the 40, and then but the thing is, for me to pull money out of the business, I would be just holding on to the check that I get in my hand. I wouldn't be forced liquidating my animals to have this check in my hand. And so it's going to take time for me to pull the money out of my business, and I may not be able to pull the money out of my business fast enough. This is also one of the things that's very, you know, I may not be able to pull the money out of my business fast enough for me, you know, because the thing is, like, if I have, you know, if I'm pulling let's say I'm pulling $15,000 a month out of my business for the next 4 months. Well, I only pulled 60 grand. I've only pulled 60 grand. You know, even if I managed to invest all $100,000, you know, if I managed to invest all 100 grand in that 4 months, that 100 grand would already have started making me a positive return. Even if I start pulling, you know, the next month, if I start pulling $50,000 out of the business, I mean, I may not be able to pull. Even if I'm pulling $40,000 a month out of my business, I may not be able to pull the money out of the business fast enough. This is also one of the big problems. You know, I may not be able to pull the money out of the business fast enough. And so, but this is also what I mean by all of the pools of money will grow at the same time. I'm not stopping investing, growing in my business. I'm not stopping the investment into my business. I am just investing into my business, utilizing straight debt. And the reason that I am doing that is because I am looking to increase the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet in terms of a proportion to my equity position. Let me move my seat back a little bit because the sun is heating up my phone real bad. But that's the situation, all right? You know, none of this stuff is confusing, and I know, you know, I don't want it to be confusing because it's not confusing. All of the moving parts are that my balance sheet right now is already probably about 50. If I think about liquidating all of my animals at 800 pounds, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet would be under 50%. If I sold all of my animals at 800 pounds, about half, less than half of my balance sheet would be dead. But what's going to happen is that as I liquidate my animals, I will reinvest that money back into my business. And when I do that, the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will fall even faster. The amount of debt that I have in terms of a proportion of my total balance sheet in correlation to my equity stake, the proportion of debt that I have will fall even faster. And I reasonably anticipate that it will be about 30%. The amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will be about 30%. So if I have $200,000 worth of cattle, if I have $200,000 worth of cattle, and I'm looking to leverage against 80%, then I would have to take a loan. And I'm already at 30%, but I'm looking to take a loan up to 80%. I would have to take a loan for 50% of the animals, right? And that would be $100,000, right? I would have to invest $100,000 into my business. And I would still, even then, I would be producing a check in my hand. I would still have a check in my hand for another $14,000. And if I put that $14,000, if I took that $14,000 in pool number 3 and moved it over to pool number 1, the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will go even lower. The proportion of debt that I have on my balance sheet in terms of a ratio to my equity stake will go lower if I reinvest my earnings. So I will take my earnings and I will hold on to that money. All right. And I will just invest with straight debt. And here's the thing. I will not be able to invest $100,000. It'll take me some time to invest $100,000. I mean, I would need much larger facilities. And if I manage to invest $100,000 in 3 months, if I manage to invest $100,000 in, let's say, 2 months, right? Those, that money that it would realistically buy me another 70 cattle. And those 70 cattle, every 5 cattle produce me 1 penny on a monthly basis. So even if I do not invest any of the $100,000 that I pulled out of the business, even if I do not invest any of that money, just because the equity of my herd is growing, the proportion of debt that I have will trickle downwards. Even whatever this is the whole thing about, I make money, even when I sleep, right? I make money even when I sleep. I make money 24/7. That's the big idea. Even when I'm sitting here doing this, I am making money. I make money 24/7. All right. The amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will always trickle downwards. Granted that I'm not being a moron, right? Granted that I'm not kicking myself in the dick. Granted that I'm not being an idiot. The amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet will always trickle downwards. Why would that happen? Because the animals that I have are growing in size, and the number of animals that I have, the size of my herd is also growing, right? I have the animals that I have, they are increasing in value because they are growing in size, they are gaining weight, and also I am increasing the size of my herd. Whether I do that by investing debt or cash, or debt and cash, it doesn't matter. All of the money that I make on top of the money belongs to me. Whether it is me investing my money, the bank's money, or my money and the bank's money, the money that I make on top of the money is always mine. I pay the bank their interest. All right, and so, this is the thing. I may not be able to pull the money out of my business fast enough. And, none of this is confusing, and I don't want it to be confusing, and it's not confusing. All right. If you have an 80 IQ, you have the capacity to understand all of this, and I'll go over it one more time and then I'll call it a day. My leverage right now if I sold all of my animals at 800 pounds, the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet in terms of the total amount of money that I have would be about 50%, maybe a little bit less. If I liquidate all of my animals at 800 pounds, okay, the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet would be about 50%. But over the next 3 months, I am realistically anticipating that I sell 5 animals a month. All right, I sell 5 animals a month, and 7 months down the line, it will be I'll be selling 15 or 10 or whatever it may be, 10 or 15, something like that. It depends on, I need to redo my loans and see. I need to get my loans back from the bank. But even if, I may need to sell 5 and buy 20. All right, I may need to legitimately start pushing the amount of debt that I have upwards. It is becoming very difficult for me to push the amount of debt that I have in terms of a proportion of my equity stake. To push the amount of debt that I have upwards, it's getting very hard. I mean, I am legitimately looking at a situation where I may need to invest like a $200,000. All right, but here's the thing: none of this is confusing, okay? And I'm just gonna go over everything from the very beginning one time. None of this is confusing. So if I sold all of my animals at 800 pounds, the amount of equity that I have, the amount of debt that I have in terms of a proportion of my equity would be about 50%. All right, if I just sold all my animals and held on to the money and then paid my debt back, it would be about 50% of the money that I have. But the animals, I reinvest all of the money back into my business, okay? I reinvest all the money back into my business. I can always take a loan against my assets. I have a credit card. I'm not worried about it, okay? I'm not concerned about it. So so the amount of leverage that I have when I reinvest the earnings and push that forward for about 3 months will be about under 30%. It'll be about 30%, maybe a little bit less. All right, because the size of my herd is growing. And when I liquidated my animals, I made a profit margin, right? And so when I reinvested that capital, I was able to buy more animals, right? They're with the profit. And so now I'm sitting here and I take a look at it and I say, well, if I just invest with straight debt and I dumped $100,000 worth of debt onto my balance sheet right now, I would be able to raise the amount of leverage that I have on my balance sheet from 30% to 80%. If I dumped, so in 3 months, let's say, I just did what I said I was going to do and I just did it, right? I just continued forward with it and I just did it, right? So I made about $100,000 and I'm sitting there with, whatever. I'm sitting there looking at it and I say, well, I have a 30% equity or a 30% debt position on my equity portfolio. I have about a 30% debt position. And so if I took $100,000 right now and dumped that money into my balance sheet, took 50% of the equity evaluation of my cattle, and I dumped that money into my balance sheet right now, instantaneously, it would raise the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet to 80%. But I also have a check in my hand for $14,000. And if I put that $14,000 into the business, there is a profit margin on it. I would have to take a loan for another 14 animals, right? I would have to take a loan for another 14 animals. Or the amount of debt that I have on the portfolio would fall below 80% again, right? And so I just pulled 100,000. All right, it might be 140, 100, something like that. I pulled 100,000. But for me to pull the $100,000, I would need to just hold on to the check that I have in my hand. I would not be forced liquidating animals so that I could have access to money. I would have to be holding on to the check in my hand. And if it takes me 4 months, and here's the thing. Let's say that I do manage to invest all of the profits, and let's say I retain all of the profits, and the rest of the animals would still be producing me money. The money would not be a check in my hand, but there would be an unrealized gain on the value of my herd, right? the number of animals that I have has increased drastically, and the size of the animals is increasing on a daily basis as well. So I would have to leverage against all of that to keep my balance sheet at an 80% leverage. I may not be able to pull enough money out of my business fast enough. That may become a very big issue. Even if I'm pulling $40,000-$50,000 a month out of my business, I may not be able to pull the money out of my business fast enough to keep my debt position at 80%. I may not be able to. The amount of money that I'm making is becoming very drastic. Because let's say that I did manage to invest all $100,000 of debt. Let's say that let's say theoretical situation, I take a look at my balance sheet, I realize that I'm 30% leveraged, and for me to increase the amount of debt that I have on my balance sheet, I invest $100,000 instantaneously. I found a way to do it, and I managed to do it instantaneously. And I still have a $15,000 check in my hand. I still have a $14,000 check in my hand. Well, 1 month later, let's say I managed to buy 70 animals. Those 70 animals will have produced me, those 70 animals would have produced me like 14 pennies, right? Over that month. Would have produced me about 14 pennies. All right, so I pulled the $14,000 off my business, and I didn't invest that, so, and I'm just continuously investing with debt. And the next month, I bought, so the next month, even the $14,000 that I didn't, the $14,000 that I have in my hand, I didn't invest any of that, and I just took a look at my balance sheet and I said, well, I have 14 pennies worth of unrealized gains right here. I have another set of animals behind them that have I have 28 animals worth of unrealized gains here that I am, because it's been 2 months. I have 28 pennies worth of animals right here that I would be willing to leverage against. That's an unrealized gain, right? That 100 grand has made me a return. So I have 28 pennies sitting there, on those animals, right? And then the animals in front of them, 15 animals have produced another 3 pennies. The 15 animals in front of them have produced another 3 pennies. The 5 animals in front of them have produced another penny. The 5 animals in front of them have produced another penny, and I still have another $14,000 check in my hand, right? That's what it would turn into. Right, even if I dumped all of the money into my business instantaneously, let's say that I found a way to invest all. Let's say that I drastically increased my preconditioning space, and I legitimately managed to instantaneously dump all $100,000 of money of debt into my business, right? And that rose my that raised the amount of leverage proportion that I have to 80%. 1 month later, let's say that I bought 70 animals. Let's say that I bought 70 animals with that 100 grand. Those 70 animals 1 month later would have produced me 14 pennies worth of money. Another month, I would have another 14 pennies worth of money. So that would be 28 pennies, right? That would be 28 pennies. And in front of them, and I didn't invest any of the money, so there would not be another set of 14 pennies behind them. But let's say that I have in front of them, I would have 15 animals, right? And those 15 animals would have produced me another 3 pennies. I would have another 15 animals in front of them. They would have produced me another 3 pennies. I would have another 15 animals in front of them that would produce me another 3 pennies. I would have another 5 animals in front of them. They would have produced me another penny. Another 5 in front of them, another penny. Another 5 in front of them, another penny, right? So we're effectively talking about I would have just in that month, I would have already made enough money, even if I don't reinvest my earnings and I just leverage against my balance sheet to keep my balance sheet at an 80% leverage. I would have to leverage, what's like 28 plus 10 minus 4. Oh, what's 28? What's 28? You know, I don't. You know, what's 28 plus 9? That's 37 plus 9 would be 46. Plus 3 would be 49. Plus 3 would be 52. Plus 3 would be 55. Plus 3 would be 58. So I would have already netted myself, you know, I would have another 58 pennies worth of unrealized gain on my balance sheet. All right, it would be in pool number 2. I would not have paid myself the money yet, but my herd will have drastically grown in size. My herd will have instantaneously grown in size by 70 animals when I dumped the $100,000 into the business, right? And I still have the rest of my animals, right? And so, you know, I would have like another like 56 pennies already after, you know, 1 month. I would have like another 56 pennies after a month. And I may not be, you know, dumping the 100 grand back into, you know, but then I would leverage against, you know, the 56 instead, and I wouldn't even put the $14,000 that I made back into my business because I'm already in a situation where the amount of money that I'm making is becoming too large. If I put the $14,000 back into my business, that's going to make my situation even worse. All right, that will make my equity stake proportion go upwards, right? And so even if I just leveraged against the balance sheet and the unrealized gains, I would still, and I dumped $100,000 instantaneously into the business. You know, the unrealized gains from that $100,000 and the rest of my herd after just 1 month would produce me enough money, even if I only leveraged against 80% of it to buy like another 45 animals. And now it's like, oh my God, right? I mean, and I'm sitting there pulling out $14,000, $40,000 a month out of my business, right? Sitting there going, you know, pulling whatever, right? $40,000 out of a month out of my business. I can't even pull the money out of my business fast enough, right? So I got to figure it out. I mean, you know, I need to go and buy myself a giant piece of land and take a loan for it or something. I need to figure out not to utilize more capital. I need to figure out, well, I do need to figure out how to utilize more capital. The amount of money that I'm making is increasing so astronomically fast that I can't even, like I would have to invest like $200,000. I would have to invest like $100,000 a month just to keep, like, you know, and that wouldn't even do anything. You know, if I instantaneously dumped $100,000 into my business, like, you know, instantaneously, within a month, that money would have made me a return. The rest of my animals would have made me a return. And if I just leverage against the unrealized gains, if I just leverage against the amount of gains that I made in pool number 2, you know, it's still just a large sum of money. You know, it's still like, I would still, you know, even if I'm not investing the money that I make on a monthly basis, even if I may not even be able to pull the money out of my business fast enough. Because if I dump the $100,000 into my business, you know, and I buy 70 animals and I still have the rest of my animals, and a month later I have enough unrealized gains to, if I leverage it against 80% of it, well, I would have to, you know, I may even have to leverage against 100% of it. I don't, you know, let's say I leverage against 80% of it, I would still have to buy like 40 more cattle, right? 45 more cattle. And if I bought 45 more cattle, those 45 more cattle would produce me an unrealized gain as well. They would produce me more money, right? So my money is going exponential. This is what I've been talking about, right? And, you know, and I am looking, and I will look into buying myself a big piece of land. You know, and I do need to be able to precondition a large set of animals and just in general run more cattle at the same time. And I probably even need to get, you know, more elbow grease, right? People building barns, fixing fences, flying drones. I mean, legitimately veterinarians. I may legitimately have to do, you know, buy a new truck, everything. All right, it's turning into a big project.